Hello and thank you for joining me in this Mind Mastery video. Today I'm going to continue with the subject of authenticity. This time I'm going to focus on projections and how we come to confuse the contents of our personal unconscious with what happens with other people and how people are truly represented in their reality. So to understand the projection, it might be quite useful to first understand what the introjection is, which is the opposite process. So when we introject, we basically assume that characteristics which other people display are our own. So for example, we might associate ourselves with certain individuals displaying certain personality traits, and we come to assume that these personality traits are our own. So we basically take what belongs to other people on the psychological level and we make it our own. So this could be also applicable in situation where, for example, you are high in empathy and you might introject certain emotions of other people. For example, someone becomes sad or miserable, and by this process of empathy, you introject these emotions and you attribute it to your own behavior. Perhaps you start looking for causes of why am I feeling sad, where is it coming from, and so on and forth. So introjection is the opposite of projection. So by understanding this definition, we can obviously now come to a proper understanding of the projection, which is basically attributing our own personality traits, behaviors, characteristics, or mental states to other people. So, for example, we might feel, to use the same example, we might feel sad, but we don't really like to own the sadness. So we suddenly see people around us being sad, which obviously might not be true, but we rather see our own emotion or emotional states in other people, which is a projection. That's the simplest definition I could come up with. Now the process becomes a bit more complex where we go beyond the emotional world and we start to attribute certain characteristics, personality traits, judgments, opinions to other people. And I think that the easiest way to actually spot projections is during very heated emotional moments. For example, during an argument. We might argue with someone about something and we might become angry, we might become very frustrated. And because we don't acknowledge our emotional reactions, we suddenly see that other person is very judgmental towards us. Other person is very unfair. They attack us personally. That's the key one when it comes to projection. We might see that they judge us very, very negatively and they try to punish us for something. And in reality, it's probably not true, although it might be. It depends on the argument and the level of development of that person, obviously, and whether they are projecting, because if two people are projecting on one another, that's not a very nice situation to be in, because obviously you're not going to be able to communicate at all, because each person will be literally talking to themselves, talking to their own projections. Now, I think that projections are very closely linked to our ego or our self-esteem, if you like. One of the roles of the ego is to keep itself coherent, keep our personality coherent, keep ourselves relatively stable so that we don't go too much up or too much down when it comes to emotional reactions. And when this security is threatened, when something doesn't fit into the definition of the ego, then there are several different defense mechanisms that the ego can engage in. For example, let's imagine that we've made some mistake. And this mistake can cost us our career, for example, because it's so severe that there is no other option than to basically quit whatever we've been doing. I know it's a very extreme example, but that's the best I could come up with in order to illustrate my point. And the only person that knows about this mistake is you. So that's a very sneaky situation, but basically everything is up to you. You can go to your boss and tell him about your mistake in order to fix it. You can basically keep silent in hope that, it will just go away and maybe someone else will fix it. Or you might try to fix the mistake by using different methods. Now, obviously, because it's a very stressful situation and, everyone in the company knows that someone made a mistake, but nobody knows who. The only person that knows who made the mistake is you. So now, every time you go to work, you're going to be flooded with paranoid thoughts about, what if someone found out? What if, everyone knows, but they're waiting for you to speak the truth? What if your boss knows? And so on and forth. So that's a very strong threat to your ego, because your ego tries to maintain this coherence and basically feel good about itself that, nothing truly bad happened. But since, nobody knows about your mistake, you're getting all these paranoid thoughts, you're going to start getting very suspicious about people. For example, you meet your coworker at your lunch break, and he starts to talk about someone who cheated on him years ago. Obviously, your palms are sweating because, you start to think, oh, does he know? Does he know about my mistake? And after a while, if you start projecting, you might actually start seeing signs that your coworker knows about your mistake and he's ready to go to your boss. He starts to talk about all these different stories related somehow to your situation. He starts to talk too much about loyalty and honesty and so on and forth. And you basically expect him to go to your boss and tell him about your mistake. So this example shows us that projections can make us paranoid to some extent, or rather being paranoid is a state of, projecting a lot onto the environment, where we can't distinguish between the true reactions of other people from our own reactions, our unconscious reactions, which are outside our conscious awareness. So now probably it would be worth to ask, how do we know whether we're projecting or not? Because the example I've given is a very extreme example, and, it doesn't happen to everyone. And most importantly, we don't have to be in so severe situations in order to start projecting. It might be very simple things such as, judging other people, or having certain emotional reactions to their behaviors. So the first most important thing, if we want to investigate whether we are projecting or not, is to simply question our reactions. Where do our reactions come from? And that obviously requires a certain strength of our ego in order to be able to accept what we might find out on the other end. Because usually projections are about all these repressed aspects of ourselves, drives, motivations, intentions, judgments, personality traits, which we don't want to acknowledge about ourselves. And once we start questioning our reactions, we might find out that we are not as nice as we thought we are, for example, or that we are not as competent about something as we thought we were. And obviously that might be quite ego-shattering for some people when you find out that perhaps there's more to learn about yourself, perhaps there's more to learn about your life, about other people, or perhaps you might want to reevaluate your behavior towards yourself and towards others. So obviously questioning our reactions might lead us to a very difficult place, very dark place, because ultimately projections are connected with our shadow, which is this part of ourselves which is not very nice in a general sense. Basically, the shadow is all about what you believe is right, what you believe is morally correct, and it contains many different drives that many people probably see as, even evil in many respects. So because the shadow is repressed, nobody wants to think about themselves like that they are being capable of hurting other people, doing very nasty things towards other people, and so on and forth, without going too much into details. And because it's all repressed, how much it's repressed, it really depends on each individual. But because it's repressed, it's going to come out anyway. It might come out through your, for example, interest in, playing very violent video games, for example. And it might come up through your projections. A good example here would be when someone sees another individual as being very, very evil in some respects. And what they start doing is they start complaining to that person. They start to, express their opinions, like, I think that you're bad, I think that what you're doing is wrong, and so on and forth. But in reality, what happens is that they are not truly judging that person. They might be, I don't know, they might be, but in most cases what happens is that what they are doing is they are projecting their own shadow onto that individual who is probably quite innocent. They might do some bad things, but if an individual is projecting, then they will not see the real individual. But what they're gonna do is, by trying to express their opinions about that so-called evil individual, they actually pass judgments onto their own shadow. And not only that, but they also allow this shadow to express itself. Because at the end of the day, what happens is that this individual who passes the judgment is actually abusive towards the individual who they think is evil. So probably that's the well-known scenario of what happens when we start projecting our own shadow onto other people. And the deeper we go into our psyche, the more projections we're going to discover, because once we figure out how to deal with our shadow and its projections, then we're gonna meet our own anima or animus, which is probably even worse than the shadow itself. It's more complicated, and it can't be seen entirely as black and white as the shadow could be seen, because it also contains certain creative elements, certain good creative elements which can help us to develop. But I'm gonna leave the subject of anima and animus for another time. Anyway, to close this video, to withdraw our projections, we need to be able to question our reactions, why we react in a certain way towards other people, especially if our emotional reactions are very strong. That can give us a clue as to whether we are projecting or not. Because strong reactions, especially strong reactions and strong emotional states towards other people, directed towards other people, are usually a manifestation of this projective mechanism that our ego is engaged in because it doesn't fully accept or even comprehend its own shadow. So thank you very much for watching. I will see you next time.